good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this hybrid event on next steps on the Plastic Pollution Treaty. This event is co-hosted by TESS, the Global Governance Centre at the Graduate Institute, and the Geneva Environment Network, in cooperation with the governments of Barbados, Ecuador, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. And I'd like to thank them all first for their collaboration. I should also note that this event is part of a wider series called the Plastic Pollution Dialogues that's coordinated by the Geneva Environment Network. And it's a really fantastic example of the power of collaboration among governments, IGOs, and stakeholder groups. I'd also like to thank my fantastic colleagues at the Geneva Trade Platform for their help in making today's event possible and professional. Thank you very much. So we're also delighted that so many of you are here in person at the Institute. We have more than 200 people joining us online over the course of the afternoon. So you have to imagine that you're here in person as part of a much wider audience that you can't see. And we're also it's also great to see we'll have a good number of our speakers here in person as well, but many will be on the screen as well. So I think it's fair to say that this hybrid approach is here to stay. A great advantage, though, is that we can manage to bring people into our discussion from Geneva. So one of the most striking things about the plastic pollution issue is the energy, the motivation, and the vision of those who've worked across the world to put this issue on the global agenda and to achieve the really historic resolution last month in UNEA to launch negotiations on a legally binding international instrument on plastic pollution. So I know that many of you on the call today and in this audience are those who are really responsible for generating that momentum and ambition. That what we wanted to do today is to reflect that we're at a really critical juncture. It's a really key moment to renew our focus on the overarching vision and specific goals for that treaty. What it should aim to achieve, what are the sort of features it needs to translate the ambition into meaningful outcomes and concrete commitments, and what kind of international collaboration will be required among stakeholders and also with the diversity of international organizations. So the key thing you've noticed about our agenda today is that it's ambitious. It's ambitious in the sense that we're going to try and tackle some of the big issues around vision, priorities, specific goals and elements the treaty needs to have. And it's also ambitious because we have a lot of speakers in a very limited period of time. So that makes me feel that I should be very swift. A disadvantage of us having so many speakers is we won't have a lot of time for Q&A today. However, for those of you online, we will be keeping track of all of the comments and resources that you post, or questions that you post, and we'll reflect that in the report from the meeting. We also have a reception afterwards that many of you, or all of you who are here in person, are invited to join, so that provides another opportunity. So to set the scene for our discussion, I'm delighted to introduce Ambassador Luis Vallas, who is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador. He has extensive experience in multilateral environmental negotiations and as a diplomat here in Geneva. He was also the Vice President previously of the Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention, the Rotterdam Convention, and the Stockholm Convention. So he brings to this discussion of plastic pollution a wealth of international experience and perspectives. So we'd like to offer the floor to you, Ambassador, to make the opening remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So nice to be here. Mrs. Leticia Carvalho, Head of the Marine and Freshwater Branch of UNEP, Mr. Rolf Payet, my good friend, Executive Secretary of BRS Secretariat, Ambassador Xian Shang, Deputy Director General of WTO, Mrs. Isabel Duran, Deputy Secretary General of UNTAD, and His Excellency, my dear friend and colleague, Jose Valencia, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the WTO. Let me begin by thanking the Forum of Trade, Environment, and SDGs TESS, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, and the Geneva Environment Network for hosting this discussion today on the next steps for the Plastic Pollution Treaty to build common visions and identify clear priorities for commitments and actions. I want to also commend the leadership and consistent determination of all governments, UNEP, international organizations, and all stakeholders committed to this task. especially thanks to Barbados, Switzerland, the United Kingdom for co-hosting this event with my country, Ecuador. After successfully launching negotiations towards a binding instrument on plastic pollution in UNEA 5.2 last March in Nairobi, Kenya, and following achievements such as those of the Basel amendments, which address several international environmental matters, and the constructive dialogues and activities supporting multilateral efforts on the matter at the World Trade Organization and at UNTAC, we have here a great opportunity to jointly reflect and share our visions on the next steps that governments and relevant stakeholders can take to ensure a successful outcome in the negotiations on plastic pollution treaty. Before starting our session, I would like to share some ideas on how we can contribute to successful process. First of all, I believe we need a collaborative, multilateral approach and multi-stakeholders engagement. The states must react to the challenges put forward by unforeseen adverse effects of economic activity on the environment. Also, protecting the environment and advancing sustainable development will ensure that essential conditions for human life will prosper worldwide. Environmental protection and sustainability are not just lofty concepts. They require political will, practical commitment, and complex and concrete efforts from all nations. To paraphrase a well-known quote that says, protecting environment is 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration, I would say that a global problem demands a global solution. And governments have a critical role to play in finding this solution. Ending plastic pollution requires enhanced collaboration and coordination among countries across the United Nations system and within other international organizations. We need the international community. Also, we need, of course, the governments and non-state actors to work together towards a shared environmental goal. Therefore, we need to engage stakeholders such as the environmental community, academia, science institutions, trade experts, and civil society, and the private sector, of course. Second, we must enhance coordination among instruments and processes. And I question, what experiences can guide this process, including across international systems? Well, I believe we need harnessing the extraordinary energy and expertise from so many stakeholders that we have. I would like to emphasize that international organizations' collaboration is essential to address all aspects needed to tackling plastic pollution, noting that we need expertise and issues ranging from planning infrastructure to waste management to public health considerations, sustainable policies and innovation, new circular business models, alternatives and substitutes, of course, also the role of informal sector workers in waste picking, policies on chemicals, strategies for financing the transition to sustainability, cleanup and ecosystem recovery, and policies related to climate and fossil fuels, among many others. Also, we should learn from our successful experience, laying the ground today to galvanize cooperation. Geneva is the home of a rich and diverse network that can contribute with expertise and will to this process. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention have successfully addressed several environmental matters in the international field. Also, this is the case for the WHO and the health-related aspects of this problem. There have also been very successful processes, such as the Minamata process, in which my friend Fernando Lugris was instrumental. In this spirit, I'm also delighted to see the continuous consideration of the relationship between trade and sustainable development at the WTO, WCO, and UNCTAD. Solid work on trade and plastic pollution, the circular economy of plastics, etc., will definitely contribute to the INC process. Furthermore, we need to have national and regional perspectives on the matter. Addressing plastic pollution will eventually require opening various lines of actions and efforts across diverse domestic realities and challenges. Right now, we all agree that most governments share the commitment to work on plastic pollution based on a whole life cycle approach, including tackling marine litter and microplastic pollution. There is a very positive momentum as we also see local governments, regional organizations, the private sector, and NGOs collaborating and developing more integrated approach and tackling this problem. I would like to...
And other civil society stakeholders contribute to a common goal, as Vice Minister Luis Vallas told us minutes ago. Plastic pollution is such a multifaceted reality. Its impact is recorded on almost the entire planet. It affects human beings and many other species and the natural environment where we all live. From large garbage dumps to microplastic particles, pollution continues to spread. The binding treaty will be, at the international level, a central pillar for articulating national, regional, and global strategies that allow us to face the problem with determination and effectiveness. I'm sure that this conversation between representatives of international organizations whose mandate and field of action connect them with the upcoming negotiation process will be highly illustrative. Let me briefly introduce first to our four speakers. Next, I will offer them the floor in the order shown in the program. The first speakers will be Mrs. Leticia Carvalho, who heads the Marine and Freshwater Branch of the UN Environment Program in Nairobi. Previously, she worked at the Brazilian Ministry of Environment, and she has a background in marine biology and sustainable development. Next, I will give the floor to Rolf Payet, the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. He is a renowned international policy expert, researcher, and speaker on environment, climate, and island issues. He has the former Minister of Environment and Energy in the cabinet of Seychelles. In the third place, I will give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Rapchenstein. He's Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. He has an extensive career in international trade, serving as Vice Minister in the Ministry of Commerce of China, and until recently as China's permanent representative to the World Trade Organization. Early on, he has supported work on plastics pollution on the role of trade. And our final speaker will be Mrs. Isabel Durand, the Deputy Secretary General of UNTAD. She's a former Prime Minister and Senator of Belgium, as well as Vice President of the European Parliament. She has been advocating to make international trade more inclusive and greener, and supported that cooperation on trade can play a big role in tackling plastics pollution. So, with this brief introduction of the CVs or speakers, I will start now giving the floor, as I said, to our first speaker, Mrs. Leticia Carvalho from UNEP. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I hope you can hear me well. And thank you very much, Vice Minister Luis Vallas and Caroline and all friends of the Geneva Environment Network. I have a couple of slides because I'm just speaking with you and addressing you a few days after the announcement of date and venue of the very expected, let's see, INC preparatory meeting, OAWG meeting for our intergovernmental committee that hopefully will still take place this year in order to start discussions to build the legally binding instruments to end plastic pollution. So next slide, please. I hope this can help you to retain a little bit the information, but I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Please take a look. It's a glimpse of the extremely powerful moment when the decision to develop the INC was taken earlier this year in Nairobi during UNEA 5.2. Next slide, please. I'm sure that this image is in the heads and in the minds and the hearts of many of you. So a quick overview about the resolution, because I think this will be instrumental for you in moving forward before I go and speak about what UNEP is dreaming about this initiative. But the resolution calls for the development of an international legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. And in order to do so, UNEP and the executive director are requested to convene an intergovernmental negotiating committee. We are all called INC as per the nickname. This work has to start during the second half of 2022, and also has to convene a multi-stakeholder forum that has to go along side by side with the INC1, and hopefully will continue in the journey and the trajectory ahead. This enterprise, it's quite challenging and has to come to an end in a very positive and ambitious way by the end of 2024. So UNEP is now, as I have just mentioned in my initial remarks, moving to the dates of 29 May to convene a session, an informal session that can bring all different stakeholders together in Senegal, Dakar, and then followed by 3rd May, 31st May, and 1st June, where the official meeting of the OAWG will take place to prepare the work for the INC. Next slide, please. So what this instrument is mandated to articulate, and first and top priority is to promote sustainable production and consumption of plastics, including 3 very important elements: product design, environmentally sound waste management, and really promising resource efficient and circular economy approaches to be an intrinsic part of this articulation. Technical capacity and means of implementation, of course, and adequate and predictable finance also to assist the ones and leave no one behind, the ones that need and leave no one behind in this trajectory. Also strong articulation on data monitoring, reporting, and means to keep effectiveness and compliance up to date. Of course, the national action plans and the national action is an essential element in this whole construction in order to build collective action, let's see, at global level. All of this has to be based in a very strong scientific and socio-economic, let's see, assessment and information. And of course, as was mentioned already for both of my previous speakers, multi-stakeholder engagement and cooperation in all levels will be required in order to succeed. Next slide. So what is the INC still to consider it? And of course, we will have a mix and a myriad of obligations, measures, targets with a mix of voluntary approaches. This means, and this sentence in the resolution has to be interpreted as really the vessel for global and all levels action. So everybody will be requested and all hands on deck in order to deliver what is the ambitious and perhaps really never tried before outcome for this agreement that articulates the ubiquitous element of plastics in our economies and in our environment. A financial mechanism, a finance mechanism that can support at the level of the ambition will be absolutely critical. Natural circumstances to be considered and further articulated in a way that can commit and deliver the global outcome desired. And of course, again, as I mentioned, the scientific and socio-economic information and best practices included. Next slide, please. So, but the resolution is not only about the IMC, and this is very important to state it here. The previous actions are already stated during the previous year's resolutions since 2014. All the global action taken at voluntary basis for so many different players in this landscape are required to be continued, to be strengthened, to be enhanced. And this tackles all the aspects of the global future global agreement. And we envisage the global partnership that started with Marine Litter to be really elevated to a global plastic partnership that can bring together all this constituency. And of course, member states, but not only member states, all the ones already taking action are required to continue and advance in these actions in order to deliver sustainable consumption and production, to really reinforce circular economy approaches, to develop action plans, and to promote environmentally sound management of waste management, considering the national circumstances. Let me take you, I think this is the last slide. I quickly articulate to what UNEP is dreaming, because we want you to see us as the conveners, as the supporter of the global discussions, but also we have dream and ambition. And our executive director, Inger Anderson, is being adamant in saying that we want to contribute to the highest level outcome. And in this regard, I would say we dream with the elimination of unnecessary, avoidable, and problematic plastics and plastic products and polymers. We dream with a safe circularity. We envisage sustainable management of products across life cycle and the reduction of the impact of risk environment and human health along the whole plastic value chain. And we hope really to be able to guide and design a preparatory process that can help you and the international community to come to this outcome. It's very important also to state that we hope to design a strategy that can help you also to articulate properly the means of implementation, the necessary capacity, and really to develop the agenda or leaving no one behind in this process. So a very important point, just to conclude in a final point, the multi-stakeholder engagement is a must in this process. We are very careful in, together with the formality of a process as an IMC, also to make sure that everybody that matters in this process will have a voice. And the ownership of the outcome will belong to all of the myriad of the players in this process. So beyond what is already stated very clear, and it is an obligation in the resolution, that's really to bring the informal sector, the industry, the civil society, the indigenous peoples to this conversation with a face, with a voice. UNEP is also very much committed to facilitate the inclusion of all stakeholders across the life cycle and source to see. So we will all carry on multi-stakeholder dialogues and forums, as such as you are doing. We would very much welcome to work in collaboration with you. We will really lift the multi-stakeholder agenda that is predicted in the resolution, but not only, and we will use the best of UNEP's program of work in order to advance multi-stakeholder engagement. So I really encourage you to be following the next steps in preparations for the OAWG. I would be more than happy to continue to join in the Geneva network to update you about the next steps. I hope I have shared well the procedural elements that would be important for you to know. At the same time, speaking from the heart of UNEP, our ambition and the way we hope to join hands with the international community to deliberate against plastic pollution. So my last slide is just a thanks. Oh, yes, sorry, there is still a timeline, but the timeline is still too early to share. So this is an envisaged pathway for the whole INC. We will have more opportunities to discuss. Thank you very much, and back to Minister.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we appreciate it very much. So following our program, next we have the presentation of Mr. Rolf Payet, Executive Secretary of the VRS Secretariat. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Jose Valencia. Thank you very much, Leticia. Great to see you, His Excellency Luis Viagas. I'd like to haven't seen you in a long time, so very nice to see you. And of course, greetings to Excellency Ambassador Zhang Chen Zhang. And greetings to all Excellencies and participants. And thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the session this afternoon. In terms of the next steps, the BRS today will be focusing on 3 important areas. The first one, of course, is the ongoing work of the 3 conventions, in particular the Basel Convention. As you know, 2019, there was the decision on the amendments to the plastics in the annexes, and of course, another number of activities arise from this, which the Secretary was given the mandate to, and also we launched the Plastic Waste Partnerships, which is moving and supporting countries in implementation at the institutional level, but also the technical level in addressing plastic. So this work will continue. And in fact, brings me to the second point. I still want to talk about the first point. We just had the open-ended working group of the Basel Convention. And this working group, which ended yesterday here in Nairobi, we ended the work here, and already a number of technical guidelines are going in June for consideration. So as far as the BRS Convention is concerned, we welcome very much the decision for the INC, and we will keep continuing to work with the new Secretariat for the INC, but the work under the BRS Convention will continue as there's so much to be done in such a complex area. And just to give you a little insight into what was agreed to be further discussed and decided upon at the next COP, we have technical guidelines on identification and environmentally sound management of plastic waste and their disposal. We have draft technical guidance on development of inventories of solid pesticides and pesticide container waste. As you probably know, these container waste are made out of plastic. And of course, a link to that is draft technical guidelines on development of inventories of plastic waste. And we also launched on Tuesday a project with the University of Wollongong and with support of the government of Norway, a project on international governance on chemicals and plastics, really going deep into the technical and complex aspects of plastics, including additives, and also the circular aspects of plastics. So this technical work will continue, and as you know, we will have our conference of the parties starting at the beginning, soon after the so-called 50 meeting, the 2nd week of June. And in there, we have a number of decisions that will be taken by the parties. I think most important is to recognize the decisions that were taken at UNIA 5.2 and identifying those areas where UNIA 5.2 has specifically indicated the role and actions that the different conventions within the BRS will focus on. And I think this is very important to get the support and the mandate from the parties to the 3 conventions and to engage in a much more profound manner with the new Secretariat for the INC process. The second area, of course, is leveraging other areas of work into the plastic work. And this is a very important area for us because now we have a very clear guidance from the member states, especially after UNIA 5.2. And we will be looking at the role of our regional centers in supporting implementation on the ground, our global monitoring programs that we have under the Stockholm Convention, further technical work. We'd like to further expand our engagement with industry, and especially start focusing on the very important work on additives in plastics and also microplastics, look at the plastics within the life cycle approach, and of course, continue our cooperation with other agencies such as the World Trade Organization and other UN agencies that we've been cooperating with in the past, and really try to see how we can build bridges and further enhance the journey towards an international treaty on plastics. And finally, we are engaged with the Secretariat and with Letitia's team in supporting the INC process. And this is on policy and institutional support, as well as capacity building and cooperation. And also we will be announcing very soon how we will be strategically aligning with the INC process so that we can support its work and deliver results, which, as you know, we've been given a very tight deadline by the member states in order to deliver results. And I will just finish off saying that We are currently now in the planning stage, having a lot of discussions with numerous partners, including the United Nations Environment Program, to see how we can best support the process. So, Mr. Chair, Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you also to Mr. Payet for his intervention. Very interesting to see the parallels and the background that he is contributing in order to make this connection between the three conventions and the new convention that's going to be negotiated in the future. Now it's a pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Rapchenstein, Deputy Director General of World Trade Organization. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Hussein, and thank you, Caroline, for inviting me to attend this forum. I'm very pleased to see the dynamic between trade and environment. In the past, it's a sensitive issue, especially in the World Trade Organization. I think there's changes of the attitude of the members. More and more countries are believing that we need to establish the right relationship between trade and the environment. And plastic pollution is one example. This issue is my preferred topic. Before I took the position of DDG of WTO, I was the ambassador of China in the mission, and I was involved in the initiation of the informal dialogue of plastic pollution. And why we have this initiative together with developing countries like Fiji, like Ecuador, like Morocco, and Sri Lanka, because we witness the negative impact of plastic pollution in those countries, and also witness the effort they made to mitigate the negative impact. And they introduced their own measures. Some measures are trade-related measures. For example, the measures against single-use plastic products. So we assume that this global issue needs a global solution. WTO should play its part. That's the reason why we would like to initiate the informal dialogue. But it's always difficult to start the initiation at the beginning. I still remember 2 years ago, we would like to organize a session in the WTO public forum. But it's difficult for us to put our session in the agenda of the public forum. We failed to do that. Sent to Caroline and Graduate Institute. We organized a set event here in the Graduate Institute on plastic pollution. We invite some experts to make a presentation. Caroline also shared her analytical research. The ambassador from Switzerland and other countries made the presentation. So we start this informal dialogue, and we organized a conference on plastic pollution in WTO. The formal DG and the Wto and the DDG and all participate. And then we make progress gradually on the discussion. And now we have a very ambitious ministerial statement last December to cite an objective for the informal dialogue on plastic pollution. And there's another exciting good news that the UNEP reached an agreement to launch the negotiation within 2 years. I think it is historical moment for the issue of plastic pollution. We need the two process, the UNEP process and WTO informal dialogue merged together. So I'm very excited about this historical achievement. And there's another good news I want to share with you. That's for the WTO informal dialogue. This initiative was launched by a group of developing countries. Now there are 6 coordinators. 5 of them are from developing countries, including my friend Ambassador Hussein Valencia. So those developing countries, they recognize the problem, they have their vision, they have their efforts, they also have their humble request for technical assistance and financial assistance. So for the next step, I think information notification is still the basis for the future work. We still have the incomplete picture. So we need to involve more stakeholders into this process, and to get more information from different countries, from different agencies. I think in this regard, the IDP have a lot of work to do. And the second, I think we still need to do more outreach. Now we have 70 members, just half of the WTO members. There's still a gap from the 70 to the critical mass. We need to encourage more countries, especially the developing ones, to participate. And we also need to involve, the government agency responsible for the environment to participate in this process. Last but not least, I think we need to establish cooperation with the UNEP negotiation process. The resolution of UNEP didn't mention specifically of trade, but it covers the full life cycle of plastic. So we assume that trade should play some role in the negotiation, and we need to make our own contribution. So I think it's up to Jose and his colleague to discuss how to establish this relationship between the two process and finally to reach a global solution and to deal with this plastic pollution. From the perspective of WTO Secretariat, of course, we will do what we can to support this process, and within our capability to give some technical assistance to the developing countries, especially the small island countries. So I stop here. Thank you again, Hussein.
Thank you so much, Sheng. I appreciate your words and the connection that you established between trade, international trade, and this goal of having this process of negotiating the binding treaty to build something on the different perspectives that can support that common goal, that commitment of all of us. So thanks a lot for those views, and we are on the time now, I believe. So let's go now with Mrs. Isabel Durant. She's the Deputy Secretary General of UNTAD, a very good friend, very much committed to the environment, goals. Thank you, Isabel. You have the floor, please.
Okay, you are hearing me? You are hearing me well? It's okay? Okay. First of all, thank you, Ambassador Valencia, and good afternoon to each of you. First of all, thank you, Caroline, for this invitation, because of course it's really important when we discuss about pollution, plastic pollution, that we can really make the link with trade, what was just done by my colleague of the WTO. So first of all, I would like just to mention two issues, maybe for those who are not very familiar with the plastic pollution issue, that 75% of plastic material produced becomes waste. So 75% of the plastic produced become waste. That is really important to know, and we know that plastic is found in almost all the value chain today. So it's everywhere in trade. Second things, and that was very well explained by my colleague of the WTO, something happened finally in WTO, and it's very good that this informal group could start to discuss this issue. And it's true that the awareness is really increasing in member states of the WTO, and that's of course a very good news. And that I hope that this group will be also will increase the number of the members more than the 70 of today, but go a bit further also with a lot of other developing countries. So we know also that the United Nations Environment Assembly, as it was said by Laetitia, adopted a landmark resolution on plastic pollution, and it established namely an intergovernmental negotiating committee towards a binding instrument to end plastic pollution. It's also a science policy panel on chemical and waste and to prevent pollution, and such panel will have finally fundamental role in providing technical definition, which is key in order to work on that. And it also made a call for a capacity building and technical and financial assistance for the effective implementation if one day, I hope, a future binding instrument was adopted. So it's true, and the Minister, Luis Vallas, said that very well, we need a collaborative approach, we need a multilateral approach, and it's why the multilateral trade rules have also to be adapted in the future. And I hope that it could ensure that the national regulations, bans, taxes, and other mechanisms mean to tackle plastic pollution are set in a fair, non-discriminatory, and transparent manner. That's the role of the WTO. Also, trade negotiations should contribute to incrementally phase out fuel subsidies to lead to low price for primary plastic. This will give more market space for natural material or substitute, such as those based on agricultural waste and marine resources. We have also to work on tariff lines, which should be defined and expanded, so countries can act and then via tariff and non-tariff measure, facilitating trade of substitute materials and products and disincentivizing trade of single-use plastic. And finally, changing material will not be enough, for sure. In order to promote overall reduction in resource use, country needs to reduce overall plastic usage. This requires environmental services liberalization, minimum regulatory harmonization at the environmental services, but also at national level, and investment facilitation in solid waste management and recycling. So a particularly important aspect of the trade discussion seeking to tackle plastic pollution has been the key role of developing countries and of emerging partnership with industrialized one in finding win-win solution. So UNCTAD, and that's the role that we would like to play in this big issue, is first of all to support negotiations towards a binding agreement by 2024 through several actions. First, we are supporting actively the WTO Informal Dialogue on Plastics, which now has 70 members, and I hope that it will be more in the near future. We provide analysis on material substitutes and alternatives and their applicability in developing countries, and we can draw on our extensive analysis on trade policy tools, including related to single-use plastics. We are also developing a plastics trade database, which allows countries to measure flows and identify specific pollution mitigation challenges faced by their economies. And in fact, it is the first ever plastic life cycle trade database. Preliminary data shows that plastics trade was at least 40% higher than previously thought. It also indicates areas where market exists for countries that can make alternatives. We also in UNCTAD analyze regulatory trends in WTO notifications on trades related to environmental measures. We also assess impact of marine litter and plastic pollution, as well as identify possible policy recommendation and the United Nations Ocean Forum on trade-related aspects of 14. And the 4th edition is currently take place in now. We are also conducting studies on green finance for transition and transformation in high carbon areas of the economy, including examining the financing of plastic and plastic alternatives. And finally, we work on our work of the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program, which sponsors then plastic pollution mitigation programs in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Similar to what happens in the climate change debate, in the plastic pollution front, a lack of effective action will only produce losers regardless of the level of development. In the today's complex geopolitical world, with multiple health and environmental challenges, win-win is the only way to win. So we need prosperity for all. We also need sustainability to all. So that's what we try to do in UNCTAD to support all this negotiating process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General. I'm sharing your words. I have to commend UNCTAD. Its job on the plastics pollution is really a great one. They have a number of studies, analyses with regard to the plastic pollution as such, but also about possible solutions in different environments, in different regions of the world, with regard to different countries. And certainly they have also this connection with trade, you know. The IDP, the Initiative for Plastics, pollution, plastic pollution is certainly one of the main initiatives, I should say, that is now taking place at WTO. And certainly the same dynamics of working together countries in order to find these common goals in a very active way in a specific organization, in this case the WTO, could be replicated also in UNCTAD and another organization. So that could be possible, probably a way to promote that collaboration, that cooperation, that interaction that we want to foster in the whole community towards a common goal, a common challenge. So we have not much time here. Caroline and distinguished members of this panel, I appreciate very much the attention, also the audience here in this floor, and also, of course, all the people that is connected towards the system. I don't know if Zoom is special, but thank you so much for it. I'll give you back the floor, Caroline.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Valencia, and thank you for chairing an excellent opening panel. I think we achieved our goal of understanding the state of play, hearing about some next steps from some of the key organizations in this space. Of course, there are other international organizations active on this issue as well. And I think one of the really extraordinary things we've heard, if you look back, if you were to read about international environmental law 20 years ago, you would never have heard such an emphasis on collaboration and respect for collaboration with stakeholders and with a range of international actors in the system that we really need. I think the Secretary General of the UN had said all hands on deck on this issue, and I think we're really on that path. Now, I have already falling behind on my own ambition for getting so many speakers through this afternoon's events. So I can see my colleagues are saying we're already running into our next panel. So what we'll do is we'll take a break for 5 minutes for those of you in the room, and then we will come back, and those online will be back in exactly 5 minutes, and we'll get started with session 2. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Sorry to bother you. Can I ask you for the photos you took?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have your telephone number?
Yeah, but the thing is, let's go there because it's still late.
Okay, but later.
Sure.
Cool. So it's 07?
No, 1 second.
Sorry.
Can we go there because this thing is transmitting
Oh,
live?
sorry. Can you wait?
Thank you very much.
Pablo, gracias. Buenísimo. Dalila. Gusto. Ahorita te pido tu historia.
Thank you for Oh, ya, entonces.
como si te...
Está bien.
Well, but I cannot because...
You came all the way from Vevey today?
Good to see you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the second session of this hybrid event on next steps for the Plastic Pollution Treaty. For those of you who are just joining us, this event is co-hosted by TESS, the Global Governance Centre here at the Graduate Institute, and also the Geneva Environment Network as part of their Plastic Pollution Dialogues. We'd also like to thank the governments of Barbados, Ecuador, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom who are co-hosting or cooperating in this event with us, and also my colleagues at the Geneva Trade Platform who are making the actual hosting of this event possible. So our focus here in this session is on voluntary initiatives, standards and regulatory measures, challenges, opportunities and priorities. We had the opportunity in our first session to hear about the state of play on some of the key initiatives for international cooperation on plastic pollution, and particularly around the treaty. And here we're trying to dive in a little more into what exactly could this treaty deliver. And you'll remember this morning that Leticia from UNEP highlighted that there are very specific objectives noted in the resolution around promoting sustainable production and consumption, including through attention to product design, environmentally sound waste management, resource efficiency and circular economy approaches, and also that it calls on governments to find ways to promote national and international cooperative measures, national action plans and so on. So what we wanted to do with this session is to hear from some of the stakeholders who have been really involved in trying to push this plastic pollution agenda forward in their own work. This includes some of the key NGOs working on this in this area, some of the big private sector partnerships, and also some of the leading companies who are doing work within their own supply chains and companies to try and help reduce plastic pollution. So what I'm going to try and do, we have a lot of speakers again in a short period of time. I've asked everyone to be very concise. I'm going to exercise some discretion and use my fantastic Swiss bell at 5 minutes, so we keep ourselves on time. But the idea is really to get from people their key thoughts on what they're doing, what's working, and how the treaty could help them ramp up or improve on those efforts to really achieve the outcomes that we're all looking for. So without further ado, I will turn the floor first to John Duncan, who is the global lead at the World Wildlife Fund on their work on no plastics in nature. He's really been a pioneer of WWF's work in this space, and of course WWF has played a fantastic role in putting this issue on the global agenda and getting the treaty resolution in place. John, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Caroline, and I think I'm going to start by going off script, off your script maybe. I think, what I wanted to highlight today is, there are a lot of good ideas out there already, about how a treaty might work, and I think you've got assembled a fantastic group of people to talk about some of these ideas. I want to spend a little bit of time looking at, highlight how and why we got here, and the number of international initiatives looking at plastic pollution have just skyrocketed over the last year, and that's been one of the big challenges, I think, for many businesses trying to kind of figure out where to place themselves in this space. And at the same time, the number of regulations trying to grapple with this issue, particularly in the single-use plastic space, is also skyrocketing. And I think you would assume that the result of this would be that we start to see us bending the curve on plastic pollution, but it seems that the opposite is happening, or has happened. And to some extent, there is some form of correlation here. We have been creating a world which is incredibly complex for both governments and business and even civil society to maneuver in. And I think that we need to remember that this treaty has to fundamentally change this story if we want to kind of really end plastic pollution, which is what the treaty is planning to do. And so I just want to highlight that it's not the number of regulation initiatives that will determine whether we end plastic pollution, but really it's about the quality of these efforts. And in order to I suppose, get it right, I wanted to just bring us back to what are the fundamental challenges that a treaty should be trying to solve. And I think, wanted to highlight these 4 points here, really, that voluntary initiatives lack the scale to drive systems change. I think we're all relatively familiar with that challenge. There's some great work going on, but it needs to scale, thousandfold on what it is already. We lack the kind of foundational reporting systems that actually give us an idea of where we stand and where we need to go in the bigger picture. Many of the current regulations that we have at the moment are kind of ad hoc, knee-jerk. We need something which is actually kind of aligned with the value chain, the upstream and the downstream approach, and really kind of tackles particularly the fundamental kind of problem drivers. And I think also to recognize that we do need to look at how we can have a differentiated approach which targets the places that really need to be targeted. So with that in mind, I kind of going back to actually quite an old image really about, what is a global agreement? What should it look like? And I think, it's very clear in a sense you need harmonized definitions, a set of kind of common policies. And this is where, talk not just about national targets and action plans, we do need a set of global regulations that actually everyone has to play by these same rules to start making life a little bit simpler. We need common reporting mechanisms. I think some of the previous speakers have already mentioned some of these things. And then we need a simple, relatively simple implementation support mechanism. But I guess my final point that I wanted to make is just highlighting at the bottom some examples here. There are really good existing examples of initiatives, and I've only highlighted a few. But many of the things we need already exist. And the goal of the treaty needs to be to actually take those and institutionalize those. And so maybe I just want to start this session with a bit of a caution against, starting a whole lot of new initiatives when recognizing that, one of the problems and the reasons why we got here in the beginning was because we had so many initiatives to start with. And so I'll leave it there and hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you for setting a great example of being brief. I really took your point about regulation needs to be part of the picture, and also the idea we need to leverage what's already there. We don't have to reinvent everything anew, but work hard to scale up the work that's already there. And I take your point also that a lot of stakeholder groups have been doing a lot of work in that space already, and the quality, as you said, of the work that we're doing rather than the number of activities. So with that, I'm going to turn next to Feng Wang, who is the coordinator on circularity and waste in the consumption and production unit at UNEP. Feng, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. I would like to also briefly share the work we do in UNEP in terms of working with the private sector. We work a lot along the value chain and also by using sustainable consumption production. I think a lot of speakers already mentioned to solve the plastic problem nowadays we have, even to the future, we need to do fundamental transformation of the way we consume and produce a plastic, because essentially we see more and more intensive and also production of different plastic products, while the amount is going very high and also leakage rate is quite high. In order to do so, we need stakeholders, private sector, civil society and government to work along the value chain, basically in three blocks of intervention. In terms of upstream, we need to work very closely with oil and gas industry to look into how plastic and plastic products are being produced to reduce chemical concern and toxic materials in the product so that it is less toxic to enable more reuse and recycle. And then we need to work very closely with retailers, brand owners, and also packaging companies, etc., to really seek innovations or transforming the way how we design products, packaging, and different plastic containing services and products to see how do we actually can achieve reducing the problematic, avoidable, and unnecessary consumption of plastic products. That's really reducing the intensity and the scale of the plastic consumption from the source. Then we also need to work a lot in terms of midstream. How do we enable reuse so that we essentially delay or reduce the consumption of raw materials, and also make sure that we also work on, let's say, more feedstock from the cycle. At the same time, working with the consumers and the users, business users to lead to a more sustainable consumption of plastic. At the end of the day, also downstream is extremely important that we need to see how to technically and also financially make recycled content more attractive while reducing impact at the end of life phase. This is where we all need to consider the roles and actors along the value chain so that we do not address only part of the problem or the solution. We forget about the whole system. So this is where we need to work together alongside with all stakeholders, companies, and also actors all together, and by using a life cycle perspective. Through a lot of our work in UNEP, we work with businesses through pilot project, testing, advocacy, and also sharing the best practices. I just want to highlight 2 examples or areas of work we are doing. We have seen a lot of work on voluntary standards, eco-labels, which already made a lot of good progress to stimulate better product design, improve the recycled content and different use of materials, and also reuse standards. However, the way to improve the effectiveness of standards and labels is really to reduce the diversity of different standards across different brands or countries or regions to make more harmonized standards. At the same time, enforce the standards with regulatory measures to make sure that they receive sufficient enforcement and support from the government to gain support. Another example I want to highlight is extended producer responsibility. We have seen a lot of voluntary examples and sometimes success in countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, Jamaica, that industries formulate its own association or initiative to start collecting and recycling products at a voluntary basis. At the same time, we see that while making good progress and successful cases, we need to see a much upscaled, let's say, uptake, and also more buying from other competitors or companies in the market. This means that voluntary measures and also actions from the industry need the support from legislation, need also not leave others behind, and also creating level field from the policy arena. This is where UNEP is doing a lot of collaboration with both public sector and private sector to improve the partnership, creating enabling environments, sometimes a legal framework and standards, and also financing for improve the cooperation between the public sector and the private sector by providing guidance tools, but also forerun experience, most importantly, to see the conditions to upscaling at different levels and different regions and countries, so that we achieve the goal or the vision with aligned approaches, but of course also with adapted approaches according to the local context. Finally, as my colleague Leticia mentioning about a lot on the INC process, and there is also a possibility and also let's say event we will be organizing alongside the negotiation through multi-stakeholder dialogue and also a forum, let's say together with INC1, so that the voices from the industry and also from the other stakeholders can be, let's say, absorbed into the process. And this is where we are very happy to work with the private sector and also with other stakeholders to, along the process, to contribute to the discussion and also the agreements. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fang. Really useful, I think, to hear about your reflection about the interrelationship between voluntary standards and the need for enabling regulatory and policy frameworks, and also for partnerships between the private sector efforts and the regulatory ones. I also appreciated your point about the challenges of diversity of standards that are out there. And I think here it will be useful. Our next few presentations are looking at, will bring us different kinds of private sector perspectives on this. There's a lot of emphasis in the plastic pollution discussion about the need to push companies to do more across the life cycle, but also there are many companies that themselves are trying various ways to push themselves to do better. And so I think we will hear about some of that, starting first with Kitty Brooks, who is project manager for the Consumer Goods Forum's Plastic Waste Coalition of Action. And she and her colleagues have been working on some golden rules for sustainable packaging design. Kitty, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here. And I think it's really clear that we're all aware of how exposed the consumer goods industry is to the challenge of plastic waste pollution. And so the Consumer Goods Forum founded a coalition of action on plastic waste to accelerate the transition to the plastics circular economy outlined by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastic Economy. And there are 40 leading companies that are member companies of this coalition. And together they work across different work streams, looking at extended producer responsibility, chemical recycling, and importantly, design of plastic packaging. Because we know nothing is going to be a single silver bullet on tackling plastic waste. So how do we start working across different areas to try and come at the problem from different angles? And so the Consumer Goods Forum really welcomes this plastics treaty as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for systems change. And as we've heard from all of the speakers before, harmonization, coordination, and collaboration is going to be absolutely key to that. And in the meantime, voluntary action remains really important to make sure that we continue piloting and experimenting and pushing forward on different ways to tackle plastic waste. We can't just sit around waiting for someone to hand regulation. We've got to work towards what we think visions of the future could look like and keep pushing forwards on that. And as we've discussed, product design is going to be really, really critical to doing that. And there's been a real proliferation of national standards and regional standards that are absolutely critical in terms of the technical guidance that they provide in what companies can and should be doing with their plastic packaging. But within that, there's been a real demand from companies, or a desire from companies that have large global value chains across which they operate, to have global coherence and global harmonization across those design rules. So the Consumer Goods Forum Plastic Waste Coalition of Action the members co-developed along with a number of leading industry organizations, including EMF, RAP, CFlex, WWF, APRA, I mean, the list goes on, co-developed a set of global design principles called the Golden Design Rules, which really harmonize the different technical standards that we see across different regions and different countries, focused on eliminating unnecessary plastic, increasing recycling, and importantly, increasing the value of recycled plastics. And they complement the years of really high quality technical work and multi-stakeholder conversations, providing a very accessible way for companies to prioritize and get moving on action when it comes to updating and changing their plastic packaging portfolios. So it gives them a global way in, a global sense of where and how to prioritize on what they can do to move the needle across their plastic packaging portfolios, whilst enabling them to draw on national and regional technical guidelines in tandem. And so we now have 33 of the largest multinational companies that have agreed to implement many of these rules across their plastic packaging portfolios, and have agreed to report on this so that we can really see their progress globally and that kind of harmonized sense of progress across their whole value chain. Importantly, we're also seeing a number of industry organizations within countries leading the way in adopting and implementing the Golden Design Rules. So the Canadian Plastics Pact and the China Plastics Reuse and Recycling Association adopted the Golden Design Rules because they have already been globally aligned and endorsed, so they could pick them up and run with them and get moving quicker to action. So they've taken them and they've worked with their local stakeholders to adapt and localize the Golden Design Rules for their context, their legislation, their technology. And it's allowed those industry organizations at a national level to get moving quicker rather than having to go through the whole process of development, endorsement, and alignment all over again. If you want to know more, please get in touch with us at the Consumer Goods Forum. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kitty, for introducing us to those. Very useful. I'm going to be swift in my chairing and move directly on to Jean-Marc Rapchenstein, who is the Global Master Data Lead at Nestle, which is one of the companies that is working with many others to see what they can do to reduce their own plastics footprint. So we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for the invitation. As actually, I'm feeling here like a citizen of the world, but also professional master data, and I would like to step back a little bit, talking about some of the foundation we need to support the action that will be defined by this treaty. And for this, we need data points. So this will be the focus of my talk today. And in my live within Nestle, but also working with several data standardization bodies like GS1 that we speak just after. We are really focusing on three things. Identity of a product. What is a product? How do we make sure we build what we call the digital twin, which will help us to represent what plastic issue is from a data point of view and help us to measure the progress. And the third one, which is very critical as well, how do we make sure we can exchange all of this data between all of the industry partners? Starting with identity, I'm sure you all know a barcode that is on the product you are buying every day. The barcode which is doing big when you go on the supermarket. Actually, this is a really important point to get some of these identity well managed. Unfortunately, this identity is not always trust. And for your information, and it's something that we can build on already, we have in place today a way to, there is some echo, I don't know. Hope it's okay for you. Sorry for this. So there is, in the industry, we have started to work. It's too close. Should be better now. Not really. Shall I start again? So talking about the identity, I hope it works now. Identity of a product, and we are working with the industry on how to improve the quality and the trust of this identity. And there is something called Verified by GS1, for example, which is already used in many, many markets. I think we have about 180 million GTINs or code in this database that can be checked. But as we all know, if you have an ID card, a passport, it is only the only value it is when it is checked. So how can we make sure that from a government, from an industry, how do we better leverage this ID card which is existing for the product? Once you know that you have a product and you can identify this product, we need to understand what are the information we need to define the plastic challenge. How many attributes do we need to make sure we have a roadmap, we understand the size of the challenge, and we can prioritize and also measure the effect of all the standards and all the action and the treaty that will be taken. So for this, we are talking about the digital twin. For those who are a little bit remember what was happening some years ago, we had similar discussion on the nutritional information. How do we make sure we capture all the nutritional detail for a product, talking about food products? Here also, we need clearly a digital twin for packaging, but even more widely for the environmental information that we need to manage. For this, I really urge and ask the environmental expert, plastic expert, and data expert to work together to make sure that we are getting to this digital twin, and not everybody, every country with a different twin, but a standardized and a common twin. This is what will help us to make a difference. Last but not least, how do we exchange? There is no point for us as a company having lots of information and not being able to share it with our customers, with our consumers. How do we make sure this is happening, and ideally in a very automated way, because we don't want to increase the efficiency of all of these processes through this treaty. So we have also some solution, and GS1 is a key partner also in this. We have some of the network that can help to synchronize all of this. It's available. I think can be used much more. By the way, we are using already this kind of network to exchange some of these plastic detail with our customers in some of the part of the world, and it works. It's already available. To finish and to summarize, and I like what our first speaker said, there is a lot of things already available. Lots of the components are already there. How do we together take them, leverage them at scale with a few common standards that will help us first to adopt a common language. Common language is really critical in all of this part to make sure we all speak the same language, define plastic challenge in the same way. Plastic challenge is a global challenge. but with a very many local flavors. This is why it's important to have this global language. Number two, how do we leverage what already exists? And there is a lot. Number three, how do we make sure that when we have any gaps in what exists, we have the right experts working together urgently to make sure we find simple, efficient, and scalable solutions. I like an African proverb which is saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think in this area, we all want to go very far, so we have to go together, and this is my ask. But also, I'm sure we can go much more faster because we are already in many things which are existing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jean-Marc. That's really interesting. I know more broadly in the world of trade and environment, I'm sure my colleague Daniel will agree with me, this idea of goods that are going across, international borders and through supply chains, this idea of how do we capture their environmental footprint on a range of different issues is going to become increasingly important. So this data angle, which may seem challenging to some of us who are technologically challenged or data challenged, but understanding that that's really a huge part of what industry needs to do behind the scene to make this work. Really useful. So I'm going to turn directly now to Robert Weidman, who's the Chief Product Officer at GS1, and you could tell us a little bit more about your work and how you think the treaty process could help.
Thank you, Carolyn, and greetings to everyone. And thanks for just letting me share a few thoughts for consideration as this incredibly important work continues to evolve. I'm not going to talk about anything new at all, and I'm going to keep to time as well. GS1, as Jean-Marc just mentioned, hello Jean-Marc, neutral not-for-profit standards organization that you know because of the barcode that goes beep whenever you go into the food store. It's a little bit bigger than that though. That beep happens 6 billion times a day. There's 100 million, 200 million unique different products made by companies, made by more than 2 million companies around the world that use these standards. It's across global retail, healthcare, transport and logistics, even rail and construction. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, they're all sectors that are highly relevant whenever we talk about sustainable production and consumption globally. And that's a vast network of people and knowledge that can help address the opportunities that we have to make a difference together in ways that are pretty far upstream in these supply networks. So as Jean-Marc mentioned, what do? We help get global identification right for stuff, for people, or for things, for places, for entities, for transport units, for logistics units. And we create the standards for marking and tagging and sharing the data about those things. As was mentioned earlier, to reduce plastic waste, it's not about a bunch of new initiatives, but we do need to do a lot of things. The challenges are multifaceted. I believe one significant opportunity lies with increasing the visibility across the entire life cycle of the products and things that have plastic in them. What do I mean? I'm talking about knowing more about the who, what, when, and where of plastics globally. Without that, we can't hope to meaningfully impact sustainable production or consumption or set the foundation for meaningful measurement against goals. If our current reality is that 75% of plastics produced today end up as waste, data-driven insights should be able to help us make simple changes and do that at pace. As John Duncan shared earlier, it's not about a bunch of new initiatives, it's about the quality of the initiatives that we undertake. So 3 ideas for everyone. Demand global interoperability. That's the most simple one. The challenges of plastic waste are not national, they're not regional, they demand global solutions. Indeed demand that the stuff we're talking about, these products, have globally unique identification, and that we can understand more about how these products traverse through supply chains. Use a common data language, and use established standards, because that's not the area to compete on. Those things are neutral, they're established, and they're really scaled already. Number 2, make sure we get everybody at a common table so that the real needs can be translated into practical, interoperable actions that industries can take. Fortunately, I haven't heard almost any stories like what I'm about to say, but there are a lot of proprietary solutions out there, and they can make meaningful short-term gains and improvements, but they almost always result in vendor lock-in and multiplicative across economies, and ultimately slow progress. So in the end, Unlock capabilities that are globally available, royalty-free whenever possible, and easy to implement by all the stakeholders around the global table. We believe that knowing more about the who, what, when, where of plastics, if you will, this idea of living digital twins of the products and things that make up global commerce will unlock massive opportunity for product design optimization, increases in environmentally sound waste management, resource efficiency optimizations, and indeed the circular economy investments that are needed. And my main message, the foundations are there already. So let's not reinvent that stuff and get going. Thanks.
Excellent. Very, very interesting presentation as well on the who, what, where, and when. I know one of the issues that arises in terms of governments regulating at the border is understanding how much plastic is crossing border, crossing into their countries, and it's not necessarily easily identifiable. You know, a plastic bottle is a plastic bottle, but in many other products, there is a whole different range of materials in them, and we need to understand more about the material composition of the plastics, the additives used, and also how much plastic there is in these products and what will happen to that at the end of life as well. So I think this kind of, the more information we can have and the easier it is for parties and others to understand what's in a product, that will surely help all of us. So I'm going to turn next to Tiza Mafira, who is working for PR3 in Indonesia. I will let Tiza introduce her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I work with PR3. PR3 is the public-private partnership to reuse and replace single-use plastics. It is a global NGO working with companies and governments. We focus on designing and consolidating systems and standards for reuse. And we have a particular focus on standards that work for both developed and developing countries, and interconnectivity with the global supply chain. So I know we're here to discuss plastic pollution, but I just wanted to remind everyone, I'm sure everybody agrees, that the problem that we're trying to tackle for a better future is the problem of both plastic pollution and emissions. And plastic is a part of both problems, in that as long as it continues to perpetuate fossil fuel production, and as long as it continues to be treated as a single-use item or downcycled, it really has no place in the future. So we believe that the future of consumer goods packaging is reuse. And it helps to be visual about this, because I want to be very clear about what we mean by reuse at a large scale. I'd like to go to any kind of supermarket and purchase a bottle of shampoo, or stay at home and order any kind of food delivery and dispose of the empty container knowing that it will get washed and reused somehow. I'd like to, get on a plane, buy a drink at the airport, finish it on the plane, land in a different country, dispose of that empty container in the other country, knowing that it will enter the reuse system, get washed and reused. So we're talking global scale and city scale and national scale reuse systems. Overall, less making new containers, less chemical shape shifting through industrial processes, and less waste piling up in landfills. But we fully realize the challenges of doing that, because at the moment reuse still feels clunky, it feels expensive, inconvenient for the mainstream consumers. Most brands, and this is something that Robert also mentioned, most brands that have ventured into reuse expect me to return their unique packaging exclusively to them, right? So there's very much a proprietorship in the reuse systems that are being developed right now. And if every consumer and every distributor had to figure out themselves how to return which container to which producer, it will remain clunky and expensive. And we also have the challenge of ensuring consumers that reuse is safe, clean, and hygienic. So I believe that to overcome these challenges, three things are needed. First of all, we need standards. This will allow reuse solutions to transform from the small kind of disconnected ventures that are great right now, but need to be massive infrastructure-wide systems. And this will enable interoperability across multiple products and brands. It's like how our phones work, no matter which country we're in. It's like how our USBs work, no matter which laptop it's plugged into. Standards did that. So PR3 standards for reuse are available online now. They are what do you call it? Open source. They're open source. They've been trialed and will be vetted further through the World Economic Forum. And it focuses on collection, containers, digital traceability, return incentives, labeling, reverse logistics, washing and sanitation. The goal is, as Fang Wang mentioned, as Feng Lo mentioned, harmonization, less diversity, and pushing it to become mandatory. The second thing we need is infrastructure, much like how renewables need support from smart transmission grids. Electric chargers for vehicles need to be spread out across the city to enable electric vehicles. Reuse also needs supportive infrastructure. So this might mean that the city provides collection points for reuse, or repurposes garbage collection trucks to collect reused bins instead, or sets up shared washing facilities across the city. This might mean that cities partner with private enterprises to scale up these solutions. So governments have a role to create enabling conditions for a shared reuse ecosystem, and companies need to invest in these solutions. So PR3 is right now creating a document to outline government and private investment needed to build the reuse infrastructure grid. But as the treaty discussion progresses, please keep in mind that the role that governments and companies should play in supporting reuse should be articulated. Lastly, reuse standards need to be globally accepted. And the Global Plastics Treaty is the perfect avenue for this to happen. It needs to address the full cycle of packaging. It needs to be able to hold governments accountable. Member countries to the treaty need to be able to say, if you import packaging into my country, knowing that I have no infrastructure to recycle it, and it is not plugged into the global reuse network, then the country should have an option to reject it. This is not a radical idea, because remember, these kinds of rules of the game are what drove global trade. And you know what else drove global trade? Shipping containers. They are all the same size, they are all the same rectangular shape, so that they can fit neatly into any kind of ship, managed by any kind of logistics company, stop in any port across the globe, because they had standards. So if we want reuse to scale globally, we must collectively work together to have those standards. So with effective reuse systems, just last point that I wanted to make is that with reuse, we no longer rely on massive virgin material extraction, heavy industrial processing, and disposal. If it's standardized reuse, it can even generate 80% less emissions than single-use packaging. So we would be solving the plastic crisis and the climate crisis. Thank you.
Excellent. Tisa, I've never heard such a compelling presentation of the case for reuse and making sure we keep this front and center in the treaty discussion. So really, really welcome. It's obviously a key part of the circular discussion that can, along with substitutes, it sometimes gets a second level of attention, partly because people find it complex. And I think you provided a really compelling story about it's time to look harder at how we can do this, and that it ought to be possible to work together on the reuse side as well. So thank you for that. So I'm conscious that we are hustling along for time. We have 3 more presenters, so I'm going to ask them all to be efficient with their remarks, and turn directly now to Kristen Hughes, who's the Managing Director of the Global Plastic Action Partnership at the World Economic Forum. Kristen, you have the floor.
Great, thanks Carolyn, so nice to see you and so many friends and colleagues in the room. That's a really tough act to follow, I have to say. Tisa really knocked that one out of the park. I think amazing thoughts on the importance of reuse and refill, and so often we focus and people think of circularity around recycling and downstream, and I really love that Tisa's really pushing us to think outside the box, upstream as well. So fantastic voice there. I'd also like to just maybe in light of time, I'll probably skip ahead with part of things I would talk to, but I wanted to offer out a few dittos, because I think John, also thank you, John Duncan from WWF, incredible vision, post UNEA, and now we've got a treaty on the table. How do we actually get our heads wrapped around a set of standards that can actually help governments to address the issue at hand? Similarly, Feng's approach in pushing for the harmonization. Right now we have so many different patchworks in this approach. And of course, Jean-Marc, totally agree with you. Let's go at this together. I think there's such a massive importance for collaboration. Within GPAP, we really focus on three main pillars. One of those is convening communities, having discussions, which I think there will be plenty of time and opportunity for that in light of the treaty, and how can we actually all get behind and support this in a positive way. And actually, then our second pillar is around generating new insights and developing action roadmaps. This is a set of tools that also will, I think your next panel is speaking a lot too, so I won't go too deep into that. I'd be very appreciative of that allows other tools to be a part of this. But rather than going on and on about insights and roadmaps, I think it's also really important for us to think about two other really important issues in this discussion. And one is near and dear to your heart, Carolyn, of course, in international trade policy, but also the importance of inclusivity. And so we think about the multiple interventions that need to be made in a coordinated manner with strong collaboration, as Jean-Marc said, across all stakeholders. And we should really find ways to ensure that as we're having these discussions, we're promoting equal opportunities that ensure the needs of, positive effects on both women and men, but particularly those from marginalized and disproportionately affected communities. Things that Kitty highlighted, like extended producer responsibility schemes and the golden standards, should also really be inclusive and intentionally support informal sector workers. They can be designed to include diverse demographics and prioritize marginalized communities as well. So building on that then, complementing some of these processes, we would also then shift and say, let's have conversations that also support trade policies. Things such as the informal dialogue on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade at the WTO. These are critical in supporting international negotiation process for the treaty on plastic pollution. So, we're also from the GPAP perspective thinking is how do we support regional cooperation that's going to be stipulated within the draft resolution? How can free trade agreements and regional economic cooperation forums provide that vehicle to address cross-border barriers and promote circular plastics economies? So beyond trade, let's also then bring back the conversation again on inclusivity and the role of women, role of informal sector to be supported and enhanced as part of these greater efforts to expand source separation at community and household levels. So with that, I would turn it back to you, Carolyn, and thank you again for allowing me the floor.
Great, thank you very much, Kristen, and also for bringing in the issue of inclusiveness. As we're short on time, I'm going to swift directly to Justin Wilkes, who is the Executive Director of ECOS, which is an organization that's one of the few, actually the only non-government organization that's focused on following the International Standards Organization processes, environmental standard setting in that context. And hopefully you can give us some perspectives on how you see this standards discussion evolving and how the treaty may help in that regard. Justin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I have a few slides, so I hope you can see my screen there, my presentation. So I'm the director of ECOS, the Environmental Coalition on Standards. We are an international environmental NGO, and we're coordinating the environmental input at the international level, the regional level, as well as the national level with standardization organizations. What I want to do today is highlight the important role that standards, voluntary industry initiatives can play in helping support international environmental agreements and also legislative initiatives, whether those are regional or whether those are at the national level. And what you can see here is quite a kind of complex approach where we've tried to visualize how we see standards supporting legislation and international environmental agreements, whether that's eco-labeling type 1 and 3, whether that's voluntary sustainability standards, or whether that's your more traditional standards coming out of the ISO and IEC system. Obviously, there will be plenty of standards and standardization organizations that are developing standards, developing eco-labels, and the VSS world that are not directly supporting legislation as well, and also a lot of company standards, guidelines, and products labels and claims. And it's there I do want to focus a little bit today. There is a key role that standards can play, particularly in harmonizing definitions, in harmonizing approaches, So an absolutely vital role that standards can play in support. But to do that, what do we need from the standardization system? As per the last speaker, we need a much more inclusive approach. If standards are going to play a role or a positive role in supporting environmental agreements, then we need to have environmental stakeholders present. We need the Sustainable Development Goals and international environmental agreements to be driving the work of standardization bodies, and we need to make sure that those standards are used in the right way. I do want to highlight the large number of voluntary labels that are around company claims. We looked at those in a report last year. We called that report Too Good to Be True. I think you can realize why we called it Too Good to Be True. We looked at 82 plastic products, bottles, jugs, clothing, sachets, and so on. And we looked at claims about reusability, recyclability, recycled content, compostability, biodegradability, and we found about half of those claims to be misleading. We had serious issues that we identified with regard to relevance, clarity, reliability, and obviously most were not third-party verified. So we are seeing quite an issue there, and what we found in that report last year is very much similar to what government bodies are also finding when they're looking at claims and labels. So what do we need to move forward on? We need to ensure that loose definitions and unreliable definitions are prevented. We need to legislate explicitly on what market actors may or may not claim. We need to strengthen legislative enforcement and sanctions against greenwashing. And importantly, I think we need to make sustainable products the norm. And we can do that in a host of ways, and I think particularly from a regulatory perspective, that is perfectly feasible. We've got the European Union last week coming out with its proposal for eco-design of products, building on a very, very successful framework that they've had for energy-related products. And I think I do want to end with one question I think also feeds into the next presenter as well, picks up on the PR3 presentation as well. What can we do from a standardization perspective to make reuse and refill standards do for plastic pollution what the standardized shipping container did for international trade? I think that's quite a challenge to think about. I think it's perfectly feasible. We have a good start with the PR3 standard, and we need to take those forward, and I think potentially have a tremendously large win for the environment. We're not going to recycle our way to sustainability, but we may be able to reuse and refill our way to sustainable resource use. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Justin, for a very helpful reality check and also reminding us of how these international standardization processes work. And there's also an important need to pay attention to those, not just to assume they're going to generate standards that are credible, and then also to look hard at the kind of labeling that's out there. I'm going to turn super fast now to Daniel Ramos, who is a legal officer at the WTO and brings to this discussion enormous expertise on the intersection between trade policy and environment policy, including in the area of plastic pollution. Daniel.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for inviting us for this very, very informative event. And I'm so happy to see so many of our trade experts, stakeholders, and delegates here in the room and online. I'm sure they're all taking notes, and maybe they can answer also the questions that were posed. But just to start by saying, this will sound a little bit self-serving because I act as the secretary to the group, but I have to say the IDP, the Informal Dialogue on Plastics at the WTO, did a very good job last year on clearly identifying and highlighting the connecting points with trade of the plastics challenge. Just to use one data point that is probably overused, but it's so good, and that UNCTAD colleagues and you, Caroline, helped develop, trading plastics amounts to $1 trillion every year, about 5% of international trade. And there's still much more trade in plastics that is unknown. An example, on average, a car by volume is 40% plastics. So when you're trading goods across borders, you're also trading that plastic that has to be dealt with at the end of the life of the product. And the ministerial statement of the group last year in December clearly recognizes this connection. Now, as work moves towards more granular discussions based on the 3 work streams that were established this year, there are additional challenges and opportunities that will appear. And let me mention just 3 further reflections in this forum. First, a lot of discussions are focused on plastics wastes, even in the IDP last year, and there are good reasons for that. But the trade data shows that most trade in plastics happens upstream. 70% of that $1 trillion are actually final products or primary forms of plastics. And so moving upwards in the trade value chain could help better identify the challenges and opportunities here, both in the IDP but also in the negotiations under UNEA, including, for instance, it was mentioned before, but potential material substitutes of interest for developing countries. My second point is that there is an opportunity for trade action to focus on aspects of the challenge that are particularly trade and environment relevant. For instance, as trade experts here in the room, we are very aware of the role of plastics packaging for trading goods, not least for trading food products and to comply with sanitary requirements, for instance. Now, it so happens, as recently published OECD Global Plastics Outlook tells us that 40% of the 353 metric tons of annual plastics waste generated are plastics packaging. And these have an average lifespan of half a year. So would then discussing potential bottlenecks and solutions to more sustainable plastics packaging be a win-win option for trade experts? Certainly there are other similar issues that could be explored where trade expertise would be valuable to assessing potential solutions. And finally, as we heard today, there's a lot of ongoing efforts internationally, regionally, domestically, and industry-led, as maybe too many, as WWF told us. And working together with these processes, contributing to and avoiding unnecessary duplication is part of the DNA of the IDP, and I have to say this is an innovation of the environmental initiatives of the WTO of involving stakeholders. They have a lot of scientific information, factor information to share. But for all of these processes, I would say that working even more closely with the private sector could be key. At the end of the day, they will be at the forefront of the implementation of these policy frameworks and cooperative approaches that are decided. There are many, many solutions out there. A few speakers mentioned that. And when the policy landscape changes, they will push for even more solutions. And then the pitch here is that trade needs to be ready to take advantage of these solutions and widespread them where they are needed the most.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel, for being super timely in your remarks. So we're almost on target to finish, and we will have then time for a short break. But just to close, I really wanted to thank a really extraordinary panel. I think we've covered a huge amount of ground. I think starting with John's appeal at the beginning, let's not reinvent the wheel, there's a lot there, and how do we make sure that what's already there is more effective, and couple it with the policy frameworks and regulation that's needed to really scale these things up. I think we heard a lot also about the power of some of the very practical initiatives that industry is pursuing, and particularly around new technologies, and I think it's clearly vital that we understand those, especially when we're talking about monitoring and reporting and assessing in international framework, and to have more visibility of what's actually happening in this plastics economy that we're trying to transform. I think what was useful is to focus a little with the policy-making process in the INC. I guess it's good news that there is this stakeholder forum. I guess that's one of the key challenges ahead. And the last one I would end with is that what we haven't heard so much, we've heard hints today about the importance of accountability, importance of regulation, about really setting targets, but we haven't heard that much yet today about what those would look like. And I think that it would be extremely important for us to also think really to keep all of these initiatives honest and to make sure we're really ratcheting up. It's really something that we need governments to grapple with, is what really is the end game that we're looking for in terms of the targets for plastic pollution across the life cycle, and then help to bring these various initiatives in line behind those to help inform their development, but also bring them in line behind those so that we actually achieve not just progress, but the goals that we want to achieve. So hopefully we'll hear a lot about that in our next panel. and I will have the pleasure then of introducing our host for that. But for the moment, I'd like to really thank all of our panelists, and for those of you online for sticking with us, for excellent presentations. Thank you so much.